Into the Jungle, a journey with my thoughts as my only companion. Part 1, The Dissolution. The last thing Dr. Illyra Voss remembered before the helicopter went down was the pilot's face, not panicked, but resigned, as if he'd always known the jungle would claim him eventually. Then came the spinning, the screaming metal, the canopy rushing up like a green fist ready to punch them back into the sky. After that, nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the relentless chorus of insects that seemed to be laughing at her survival. She woke alone. The wreckage was gone, not destroyed, but gone, as if the jungle had swallowed it whole and left only her body as too bitter to digest. Her satellite phone was shattered, her GPS a cracked piece of expensive garbage, and her emergency beacon, well, she couldn't find it anywhere in the torn remains of her pack. 3 protein bars, a water filter, a knife, a lighter that maybe had 24 lights left in it, and a journal she'd been keeping for her research. That was it. That, and the jungle. The Amazon didn't care that she had 3 PhDs. It didn't care that she'd published groundbreaking work on cognitive isolation or that she'd consulted for space agencies on the psychological effects of long-duration missions. Out here, she was just meat that still had the audacity to move. The first rule of survival, she told herself, is not to panic. The second rule is to find water. The third rule is to acknowledge that you're already talking to yourself, and that's probably not a great sign. She laughed. It came out strangled and strange, absorbed immediately by the dense wall of vegetation surrounding her. The jungle took her laughter and gave nothing back. Part 2, The Descent. By the third day, Illyra had stopped counting hours and started counting thoughts. Thought number 847, the jungle is neither hostile nor indifferent, it's perpetually hungry. She'd been moving south, or what she believed was south, following a stream that appeared and disappeared through the undergrowth like a shy animal. The water was brownish-green, tasted of earth and decay even after filtering, but it kept her alive. The protein bars were already gone. She'd found some fruit that looked safe, had tested it on her inner wrist first, no reaction, then eaten half and waited 6 hours, no vomiting. Now she was foraging like her ancestors did, except her ancestors probably had better instincts and definitely hadn't been wearing moisture-wicked hiking pants that were now more whole than fabric. The isolation was supposed to be the hard part. That's what all her research had concluded. Humans are social creatures. Cut them off from contact and they begin to unravel, creating imaginary companions, talking to inanimate objects, gradually losing the boundaries between self and other. But Illyra was discovering something her research had never quite captured. Isolation doesn't create emptiness. It creates volume. Without the constant noise of other voices, her own thoughts had grown impossibly loud, a cacophony that made the jungle's actual sounds the shrieks of howler monkeys, the rustle of things she couldn't see but could definitely feel watching her seem almost peaceful by comparison. Thought number 1203, what if I've been wrong about everything? She stopped mid-step, her boot sinking into the soft mulch of decomposing leaves. That thought felt different. It felt dangerous. Her career had been built on the premise that the human mind needs external stimulation, that consciousness is a collaborative project between the self and the social world. But what if consciousness wasn't collaborative at all? What if it was adversarial? What if the constant chatter of civilization wasn't feeding the mind but drowning it, and only in complete isolation could you hear what your thoughts were actually trying to say? Careful, she said aloud, her voice cracking. That's how you go insane. Next you'll be thinking the trees are trying to teach you something. But the trees were trying to teach her something. They were teaching her that she was very small and very temporary, and that the jungle had been here for millions of years before she arrived and would continue for millions more after her bones had been scattered and consumed and converted into more jungle. It should have been terrifying. Instead, she felt an odd sense of relief. Part 3, The Conversation. On the 5th day, Illyra started arguing with herself. Not in the casual way people sometimes do, weighing options or working through problems. This was different. This was structured, formal, almost ritualistic. She would take a position, I should head east toward where I think the river is, and then immediately counter it with equal force, the river is at least 40 kilometers away and you'll die of exposure or snakebite long before you reach it. It occurred to her, in one of her increasingly rare moments of metacognition, that she was conducting peer review inside her own skull. You're losing it, she told herself, hacking through a curtain of vines with her increasingly dull knife. Define it, she answered back. Define what there is to lose. She stopped. She'd just had a conversation with herself and both sides had made valid points. The jungle pressed in, tighter now, or maybe she was just noticing it more. The canopy above was so thick that she could barely tell if it was day or night. Time had become elastic, meaningless. She might have been walking for hours or minutes. She might have been walking in circles. She probably was walking in circles. Thought number 2847, there is no difference between thinking and being. That one stopped her cold. She sat down on a fallen log carefully, after checking for ants and worse things, and pulled out her journal. The pages were damp and warped, her previous notes barely legible, but she needed to write this down. If consciousness is just recursive thinking, she wrote, then who is thinking about the thinking? And who is observing that observation? There's an infinite regress, which means either consciousness doesn't exist, or consciousness is all that exists, and the external world is just the stage it builds to entertain itself. She stared at what she'd written. Back in civilization, in her office with its view of the manicured campus and its coffee maker that made 17 different varieties of artisanal brew, this would have been dismissed as freshman philosophy, the kind of stoned metaphysics that serious academics outgrew. But out here, with nothing between her and her thoughts except the thin membrane of her own sanity, it felt revelatory. I'm not going crazy, she said to the jungle. I'm going sane. Maybe for the first time. The jungle didn't respond, but a bird something with a call like rusty hinges laughed from somewhere in the canopy. Part 4, The Revelation. She found the clearing on the 7th day, or what she thought was the 7th day. She'd stopped making marks on trees to count because the trees all looked the same and she was no longer sure if she was marking new trees or returning to ones she'd already marked. The clearing was perfect, too perfect. A circle of open space perhaps 30 meters across, ringed by trees that seemed to lean inward like spectators at some ancient ritual. The ground was covered in moss so uniformly green it looked artificial. In the center stood a single tree, different from the others, its bark almost silver in the diffuse light that managed to penetrate the canopy. Illyra knew she should be cautious. Knew she should circle the perimeter, look for signs of predators or sinkholes or any of the 1,000 things that could kill her. But she was so tired, and the clearing looked so inviting, and her thoughts had become so loud that she needed a moment, just one moment of silence. She walked to the center tree and sat down at its base. The silence came immediately, like a blanket thrown over a screaming child. Her thoughts, which had been a continuous roar for days, an infinite recursion of observations and counter-observations, questions and counter-questions, simply stopped. She sat in the silence for what might have been minutes or hours. The jungle around her continued its usual symphony of sounds, but inside her head, nothing. Not the absence of thought, but the presence of something else. Something vast and calm and utterly indifferent to her existence. When the thoughts returned, they came back changed. Thought #, you are not your thoughts. It was obvious, trivial even, the kind of thing meditation teachers said to beginners. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it viscerally were completely different things. She had spent her entire adult life believing that she was her thoughts, that the constant narrative running through her head was equivalent to her identity. But in that moment of silence, she had continued to exist. Something had been aware of the absence of thought, which meant that something was prior to thought, beneath thought, independent of thought. Who are you? She whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was asking the question of herself or something else entirely. The answer came not in words but in a feeling, a sense of recognition so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She was the awareness that watched the thoughts. She was the space in which consciousness occurred. She was. A sound shattered her revelation. Voices. Actual human voices, calling out in Portuguese.